happened to the promise of gold standard science, guys? I guess it's tough to pull off with an administration full of hypocrites. My name is Brittany Page, and this is the Page Perspective. Before we get into this today, you will see a fundraiser on this video for the National Network of Abortion Funds. This is an organization that helps fund independent abortion funds that provide support to women facing fear and uncertainty over how to handle the nation's patchwork of abortion laws with factual information and funding for travel to get the procedure or just the procedure itself. It's so important, and we would appreciate you helping us get to our goal with just a few days left on the clock. Thank you so much. Now, FDA Commissioner Marty Makary, you may not have heard much about him, certainly not as much as Secretary of Health and Human Services RFK Jr., but the main thing that you need to know about Marty Makary is that he was hand-selected by RFK and is eager to do RFK's bidding. In May, you may remember he stood right at RFK's side to announce that COVID vaccination would no longer be recommended by the CDC to healthy children and pregnant women, a move that only serves anti-vaccine activists and undermines public health. And now Marty Makary is out with a new announcement following RFK's pledge to ban food dyes, artificial food dyes, because out of all of the current public health threats, RFK thinks artificial food dyes is where we need to dedicate our time and attention. And before we get to Makary presenting his view of the research on this, it's important to note that Donald Trump issued an executive order calling for gold standard science in America. And in this order, he said he wanted research to be rigorous, reliable, and based on non-biased peer review. RFK has constantly touted his own gold standard science, despite his MAHA report being riddled with errors and citing research that doesn't even actually exist. But the latest news here is that the FDA approved a new blue color additive for use in candy and sports drinks. The blue color is a plant-based dye, so the goal is to replace artificial dyes with dyes like this one. And listen, I've talked a lot about RFK online. I've talked about him enough to know that my comments are going to be filled with people who are saying, yeah, listen, I don't agree with RFK on vaccines, but is it wrong to want Americans to be healthier? Banning artificial food dyes helps us get to that goal. And I would say, does it? From my view, it's not even close to the top of my list of priorities when we're looking at improving public health. And it shouldn't actually be at the top of anyone's list, frankly, if they care about evidence, especially not those walking our halls of power, especially when those same people are slashing Medicaid and food assistance, two things that very much, without any doubt, improve health outcomes in this country. And as far as food dyes, some evidence shows that some food dyes, in particular, red number 3, could have a detrimental impact on health. But the study that is most often cited or referenced is one that was conducted with rats, not humans. And the rats were, in the study, exposed to high levels of red number 3, which would not be the case with humans. So, like with a lot of things, some studies show artificial dyes can be associated with cancer in rats, and other studies have found an association between artificial food dyes and neurotoxicity. But mostly, scientists say we don't have enough evidence here to make a causal claim about the impact on humans, especially when we don't have causal research in humans. And I don't want to spend a bunch of time on this, so I'll just link to articles in the description. But I would take RFK and Marty Makary more seriously if their concern about artificial food dyes matched at all their concerns about actual public health threats, where the science is not mixed, where we do have enough information to make conclusions about health threats. They're talking about removing artificial food dyes in ice cream and candy, when salt, sugar, processed foods, alcohol, these are all certain culprits behind many of the worst health outcomes. Cancer, alcohol is a Toxin, my friends, it increases your risk of cancer. Many people don't like to hear this. And listen, I like my Negronis, but we can't have this pretend concern about artificial food dyes when we're actively ingesting things that are known to elevate our risks of cancer without any doubt. So here's what we're going to do first. We're going to hear from our FDA Commissioner Marty Makary on his announcement on food dyes. He made an appearance on Fox Business where he was asked about his announcement, and I want you to listen. Listen for the gold standard science his decision is based on.
Dr. Makary, it's great to see you again. Thanks for joining us. This all feels really shocking that this stuff was not removed before from food. Can you tell us how dangerous this is for America's families and children?
Well, we have a lot of data, Liz, and it may not necessarily be the traditional 50-year randomized control trial follow-up. It's data from families that say that their kids have been acting with bad behavior, with attention deficit disorder, and they eliminate the petroleum-based food dyes and the behavior improves. That is data. Okay, those are data points if we listen to parents.
Uh-oh. That doesn't sound like gold standard science to me. He says, this isn't a randomized control trial we're looking at. We've talked to MAHA moms. And the MAHA moms say their kids had problems after ingesting copious amounts of candy containing artificial food dyes. I wonder if there's other factors at play here. Could there be other factors? But I don't want to be dismissive of parents, okay? Parents who are struggling to effectively access treatment for a child who's experiencing behavioral difficulties, those parents are going to try to find answers. And they will generate ideas about what they think might be happening. This doesn't mean that they know what is causing a behavior or condition. This is a job for researchers, and we can listen to parents and we can be gentle with their fears and concerns, but we shouldn't be making sweeping generalizations and changes in protocol and policy based on MAHA moms who raise concerns to RFK. This is a recipe for disaster. But I'll tell you the main reason that I can't take this seriously. RFK is using the power and force of the federal government to replace artificial food dyes with plant-based ones in various processed foods in an effort to signal to his supporters that he's making necessary and fundamental investments and changes in public health. All the while, he's a tool in the Republican Party machine that draws attention away from the real issues of devastating harm caused by policies that strip away healthcare access from millions of Americans, preventing Americans from treating their health problems, from getting preventative care to prevent disaster. And I want to present a real-world example for you. On a recent episode of the New York Times' The Daily podcast, the host spoke to a rural doctor who detailed how the cuts to Medicaid recently passed in the Republican tax and spending bill that we've talked so much about, how those devastating cuts will impact rural areas like the one she works in. And the host asked this doctor if she could think of a few people she's treated that have stayed with her, people who have suffered because they didn't have access to healthcare. And she told one story that I think will stick with you too.
At one night clinic, this story has always really stuck with me. A woman in her 40s came in to the night clinic. She'd never been seen in our clinic before because of a complaint that people in the choir wouldn't stand near her. And she had started having an odor that made her unpleasant to be near. And she'd avoided health care because she couldn't afford it. And she was a housekeeper. She had no access to any health insurance and didn't want to bankrupt her family. And so on exam that night, she had a breast cancer that was so advanced that it had grown through her skin. And that's where the smell was coming from.
Wow.
And she ended up dying a few months later. We could have, if she'd gotten mammograms, we could have caught this very, very early and treated her, and she would have gone on to be there for her family. But her fear of bankruptcy for seeking healthcare, or maybe it was, she just didn't want to take services from someone else. It's hard to know what keeps people from walking in the door.
A housekeeper who didn't have health insurance and didn't want to bankrupt her family with bills had breast cancer so advanced it grew through her skin. And if she'd had access to Medicaid. If she'd had access to health care, she could have received preventative care and avoided death. But what about those artificial food dyes? Be serious, RFK, Marty Makary, Donald Trump. These men will talk about artificial food dyes because it's easy. Because they don't want to talk about the working class across this country who can't afford healthcare and who put off necessary treatment and die too soon simply because they can't afford care. They aren't ready to talk about something like that. They don't want to talk about that. But they will continue to sell you that snake oil and focus on the easy thing that actually does not matter. I just hope we can get to a point where we center the real story here, and that's what I'm trying to do. If you appreciate that, I hope you will subscribe. Make sure you're subscribed. It's free. You just hit the subscribe button below this video. I hope you also share this video with a friend. I try to put a lot of research into my videos, and I hope that that is something you appreciate enough to share with someone who needs to hear the message. What do you think? Call and leave me a fewer than 3-minute voicemail at 202-656-1509 or send an email to info@thepageperspective.com. You can support my work by becoming a channel member by clicking the join button below for as little as $1.99 a month or by going to patreon.com/IDoubtItPodcast. I know things are rough out there for a lot of people. Leave a comment below. Engage with the community of listeners here. Share your thoughts and concerns. Respond to someone else sharing their thoughts and concerns. I appreciate you being here. Take care, and I'll see you next time.